hot, he says, because of real witnesses at the scene, not because of the cameras. He's worried that relying on the cameras will make police and citizens less likely to do the real work of keeping Lancaster safe. We're going to come back to Lancaster and its surveillance, but let's take a second and explore Kevin's idea about behavior change. Neil Richards, the Thomas and Carol Green Professor of Law at Washington University, has been looking very closely at the science on this for years.
The bottom line for this is when we know that we are being watched, we conform our behavior to that which is socially expected of us, that which is inoffensive and boring and bland and mainstream. There are two studies, I think, that show this the best. The more serious one is in the advent of the Snowden revelations about the way people use social media and search engines in particular. And they found that after Snowden, controlling for a lot of variables, after the Snowden revelations leaked, people were less likely to use Google to search for terms like terrorism or bomb making or Al-Qaeda. The problem is they also searched less, knowing about NSA surveillance, for things like divorce lawyer or eating disorder. Am I gay? That kind of, those sorts of searches.
In aggregate, these searches were reduced after the Snowden revelations?
Yes, people search less, not just for things associated with terrorism, or radical Islam, but they search less for other social activities that are legal, but which were socially disfavored.
What do you think is scary about that?
It drives us to sort of a society that is beige, that is not unlike some depictions, accurate or not, of the 1950s, that people want to live their lives or read or learn or explore ideas that are different from the normal, but they're stifled.
Don't you think some of the people that you would present this choice to, beige society seems like a small price to pay to anyone who doesn't want to experience terrorism?
Absolutely. And I think the response to that is mass surveillance doesn't stop terrorism. Now, it can certainly investigate crimes, but we also have to bear in mind it's incredibly expensive, and it might not be the best use of our large but finite resources for public safety.
But if you had to choose a society where there was total surveillance and a society where there was zero surveillance?
I don't think such a society is possible. But I would say I would prefer a society in which there is more freedom than less freedom. I think I would prefer a society in which we realize that absolute safety is impossible.
Neil Richards is the Thomas and Carol Green Professor of Law at Washington University. Neil, thank you very much for talking to me.
Thank you for having me.
Stick with us for a minute. We'll be right back. Okay, remember that game we played, Spot the Cameras?
Where? Did you see another one?
Have you ever wondered who might be watching on the other side of those cameras?
Hello?
This is Barbara Morrow. She lives in a tiny town called Ballyhalbert on the coast of Northern Ireland. She doesn't get out of the house much, so we called her on the phone.
We live in an old Irish cottage, a whitewashed Irish cottage.
Do you have any animals?
No, we did have dogs and things, but we're both 80 now, and when our last dog went about 10 years ago, we decided then not to have any more animals.
Barbara and her husband may not have animals, but that's okay, because these days, Barbara gets to see a lot of cats. Where? Where else? The internet.
In Brazil, they have an awful problem with cats getting into the shop and hiding.
Cats?
Cats.
Yep, cats. Live on the internet in Brazil. Why is this lady in Northern Ireland watching for cats in the night in Brazil?
It was actually on the TV. There was a snippet on the TV about this new business that had started up in England, that you could catch shoplifters on your computer.
The business is called Internet Eyes, and it's basically what it sounds like. She logs onto her computer and sees a bunch of feeds from security cameras in stores all over the place. You watch for stealing, stray cats, or other bad behavior. As soon as Barbara flags something, she gets a new feed. Sometimes the feeds just disappear without explanation. Store closes, camera comes down, whatever. When you see something and say something by filling out a form, you get a reward, a few dollars. Barbara is way up there on the watcher leaderboard, usually top 3.
My husband has a big fixed computer.
Yeah.
So I have 2 cams on my computer and 4 on his, so I'm actually watching 6.
Wow. Can you walk me through, like, what happens when you see something that looks suspicious? What do you do then?
There's a red alert button, and then this other screen comes up, and it says man, woman, boy, girl, and you tick who it is that's doing it. Lady in red coat put chocolate in her pocket, or child is throwing all the produce on the floor out of the fridge.
Barbara is logging at least 6 hours a day on this. I asked her if it's an addiction.
I suppose it is a kind of addiction, really.
I gotta admit, I was worried for Barbara watching this stuff all the time. A little old lady seeing maybe robberies, burglaries, something more violent. Do you sleep okay?
Oh, yes.
Barbara actually used to be a store manager in real life before she retired. She's chased people trying to steal meat. She has faced a weirdo menacing shoppers with a knife. So she says she doesn't scare easily. She's tough. But what is it that keeps Barbara watching these feeds?
Well, I don't know whether it's because I've always liked shop work and I've hated shoplifters. I turned, one of the cameras on the other day, and there was a man just right in front of me shoving a big bottle of wine up his coat. And I just like catching shoplifters. I think I should have been a vigilante or something.
Not every feed has its own Barbara, but there are a lot of Barbaras on the other side of these cameras all over the world watching. I have another quick story for you. This one doesn't just stretch across the ocean, it goes beneath the waves, into one of the world's most formidable predators that we are still trying to understand. This is the last place you would expect us to tell you a story about surveillance or salvation. But here goes.
This is Eric. Testing. Hi, my name is Eric Birkenpass, and I'm the Director of Engineering at National Geographic Remote Imaging. One of my most memorable projects was trying to put cameras on great white sharks. We were working off of a rusty fishing boat off of the coast of Mexico. We were near an island called Guadalupe Island, and our task was to put cameras on great white sharks to capture shark migrating behavior. It was me and another National Geographic staff member. The first 2 days we were there, we didn't see any sharks, and we kind of got complacent. And I remember out of the corner of my eye on the second day seeing this kind of wake and a fin come up, and this shark that was actually bigger than the boat we were working off of took our bait without even pulling on the rope. His teeth sliced through the rope, and it just kind of dangled there. I remember thinking, like, I couldn't believe there was a fish that was that big. It was more like a submarine. So the way you put a camera onto a great white shark is you use a special pole that's connected to a camera that's on a fin clamp, and you lure the shark to go past the boat. You put a tuna on the end of a rope. You pull that tuna out of the shark's mouth. The shark goes after the tuna, and for like half a second you have this window where you can lasso this camera fin clamp over the shark. You push a button, it cinches the clamp down, releases the camera, and cuts it free all with one go. It kind of sounds like the Terminator. It's like a chunk. And then the camera's on the shark, and it's kind of not your problem anymore. And it just films whatever the shark was doing. It's also got some sensors inside that capture how fast the shark's moving, how warm the water is, what direction the shark's facing, what depth it's at.
Try that again.
I remember my coworker was baiting the shark with the tuna, trying to get the shark to go by the boat the right direction at the right speed. And
right there.
Okay, we got a shark.
There we go.
he pulled the tuna out of the shark's mouth, and I was standing behind him with the camera.
Yeah! I caught him.
And the shark was obviously angry about this and knocked the boat back about 4 feet. My coworker ended up landing on the shark, and I landed where my coworker is standing. So there was about 4 seconds of sheer terror. He was basically drifting away with the current, but he thought he was holding a rope that was tied to the boat, but in fact it was tied to the tuna that he had been baiting the shark with. So I reminded him to swim, and then he swam like Michael Phelps and jumped back into the boat and told me never to tell his girlfriend about it.
Eric and his team have done this all over the place, and a similar visit in South Africa helped make it clear that, contrary to popular belief, great whites were coming in close to the shore during the day to sun themselves and warm up, not to feed, as a lot of beachgoers had feared. In a world where removing the fear of great white sharks helps them continue to survive and exist in a fragile ocean environment, that's the kind of surveillance most people can get behind.
That's why we do it. That's why we build cameras that can probe these places that no one typically goes.
Before we wrap things up, there is one more voice you need to hear, back in Lancaster. Frida Hall. She's an African-American woman who has lived through something no mother should live through.
He wasn't even supposed to be there. He was supposed to be at a party where it was a private party. Mm-hmm. And his cousins told him, come on, let's go down here. There's a house party. Let's check it out. And he was only there 7 minutes, and 7 minutes cost him his whole life.
Frida is talking about her son, Taekwon Hall. In 2007, Taekwon went to a party, just for a few minutes. Someone pulled out a gun and Taekwon was shot and killed in the street outside that party. Frida can still remember arriving at the scene and what it felt like to come up to the police tape wrapped around the scene of the shooting.
So I said, well, what about my son? And they were like, well, ma'am, who is your son? And I said, his name is Taekwon Hall. And they kind of walked away from me. And then they came back and they brought another individual back with them and said, until we can identify him, we cannot say it's your son. So I said, what do you mean identify him? And come to find out, my son was in the middle of the block. He was the only one that didn't make it that night.
Not long after her son was pronounced dead, police brought Frida to the Nerve Center for the Cameras, the Lancaster Safety Coalition.
And they took me to where all the screens were, and then they explained to me how everything worked. They took the time to say, don't worry about anything. We were able to zoom in close enough to see the murder. And my son was actually the first murder in 2007, and it was the first murder that was caught on camera.
The guy who shot Taekwon wasn't from around Lancaster, but he was found thanks to the cameras, and the footage was a witness.
I was grateful for that because I had some concerns, like, oh my God, the camera was at the top of the block. How did you see my son in the middle of the block? How did you see the shooter? And then they showed me how they zoomed in. They took the time to really let me understand what the cameras are really about. And for that, I was so grateful.
Did you have a different opinion of the police and the way that law enforcement existed in the city before that experience?
Definitely. Before, I used to feel like, they're always picking on somebody, you know. And then when that happened to me and I seen how I was treated, I was like, wow. You know, even to this day, Detective Nichols still asks about me. And that's something that I never thought in this lifetime that I would ever build a relationship with a detective, you know. And the Mayor Gray, he came to my son's funeral. He took the time to come to my son's funeral, and that meant so much to me because I'm like, wow, for a mayor to come out, you know, just for my son, a black kid, you know, when at one time we thought that blacks wasn't important, it gave me a whole different aspect. I'm not going to lie, because I used to feel like we weren't important. Blacks wasn't important. And that day really opened my eyes up that, wow, they do look at us like we're somebody.
You've heard lots from us about all of this, and there's a lot more to say about the impact of surveillance around the world. Time to answer our question once and for all, though, and to help us do that, we've asked Anil Dash, technologist, advocate, and much more to come and talk to us. Anil?